Good morning, Avinash, Archana, Nisha, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. And in the series of lectures taken by our SRs, this lecture is by Dr. Avinash Tiwari. And Dr. Avinash Tiwari is a resident from TMH. And I request Dr. Joyita to introduce what are the qualities of Dr. Avinash, and then we will hear from him how to handle the end stage, one part of the end stage cardiac diseases. So go ahead, Dr. Joyita, please introduce Dr. Avinash, and then we have a few announcements at the end, so please stay back. We will announce at the end. Joyita, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, Sushma ma'am, and everybody on the IAPC online lecture series. It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Avinash Tiwari to you. As Madam said, Dr. Avinash has done his MD Palliative Medicine from Tata Memorial Hospital, and after completing his 1 year of SRship, he is now in charge of the Department of Palliative Medicine and Supportive Care Clinic in AIIMS Raipur, which he really made his mark in that. And you can see that he is the first specialist palliative medicine physician in this region, and that has been well appreciated by the government of Chhattisgarh. So he's invited as the state faculty for National Health Mission. He is a very dedicated clinician, and he is extremely enthusiastic, and he has written his key areas of interest as advocacy, which I can really tell you it is. He did a lot of advocacy, taking everybody's help to set up this clinic in AIIMS Raipur. He has attended different conferences, most notably the APC, where he presented his work, and he's presented his work in the Indian Association of Palliative Care conferences in 2018, 2019. And again, one of the first, he has set up this integrated specialist clinic for palliative care in sickle cell disease in rural India. And that again is one of his key areas of interest. His other interest is end-of-life care and prognostication, apart from palliative care and end-stage renal disease. He's been faculty for all our training programs, and most notably the recent one of the ASCO Palliative Care e-course. As I said, he's a very dedicated clinician with a very active interest in research, and I think he's going to take palliative care to its heights in his area. So with those words, may I welcome Dr. Avinash to deliver his talk. Over to you, Avinash.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful introduction that actually decreased the apprehension of presentation today. Thank you so much, Susma ma'am. Good morning, everyone. Today our topic of discussion is not a routine lecture, but it's a very special kind of topic because there is it's an area of very much research, and it's an area of very much ethical concerns. So is my slides visible, Archana ma'am?
Yeah, it's visible, but can you just do full screen?
Yes, yes ma'am. For better communication, I will be switching off my video so that. Now it's full screen, ma'am?
Yes, it's full screen. Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning once again. So our topic of discussion today will be rationalization of pharmacological management in advanced and end-stage cardiac disease, including withholding and withdrawing of various cardiac devices. So till now we have actually known the overview of management of advanced stage cardiac illness and end-stage cardiac illness. But how to apply those available treatment in our clinical scenario, and how to assess risk versus benefit, when to use which treatment, when to stop which treatment. Today we'll be discussing upon that. including some ethical concerns, and including some part of advanced care planning, prognosis, and other various parts has already been included in last lecture. So to start with, so the contents of the rationalization of pharmacological treatment will be introduction of the rationalization, what exactly it is, what is the process, how to approach the discussion for rationalization, what could be the goals of therapy depending upon which we rationalize our pharmacological treatment, what are the drug which we use to rationalize in our clinical setting, what are the various cardiac devices, because ultimately we are going to discuss withholding and withdrawing. So basic knowledge about the cardiac devices. So there are very much challenges of palliative care in cardiology. So start with a very difficult prognostication of it association with different kind of comorbidity. It's very unpredicting and undulating nature, and contrast mode of death. Some group of people die very suddenly of arrhythmic death, and some people actually having the decreased performance status day by day and a progressive nature in their trajectory. So the association between the cardiology and palliative care, in unlike cancer, it should not be in cancer also. It should be integrated early, but in cardiology it should be integrated more early. So and our rationalization of treatment should be always and always weighing upon the risk and benefit. So if the risk of adverse effect is more than the benefit, consider stopping the treatment or alternating the treatment. And it is not a single point or one-time process. It is always a dynamic process, and it should be overviewed on time to time. So it's a very much a regular process rather than a one-time process. And always involve your patient and family whenever you are rationalizing, because it's not just a clinical discussion, but it's a more of ethical concern. So as I'd say, in our medication chart, as we are discussing today, the pharmacological management, my focus will be more of on medical management. So medical should be reviewed regularly, and every kind of adverse effect of its continuation and discontinuation should be discussed with the patient and their family. And a different kind of treatment should be catered to the patient and their family, and the goals of the therapy, whether it is for symptomatic relief or whether it is for the prognostic benefit, should also be discussed with the patient and their family. So to define to take the decision regarding rationalization, it's more or same like advanced care planning. So like it is a process of communication for the future medical discussion. So it's an ongoing process. It involves patient, family, and their healthcare providers. It gives the choices about the current and future healthcare facilities, and it also is having a lot of uncertainties that should also be explained to the patient and their family. And it should, like in cancer, it should always begin early in the process, preferably more early. So what are the characteristics of and what are the approach of discussion? So obviously a clinical status of the patient will start or trigger the discussion. Estimate the prognosis. There are different prognostic model in cardiology, which we have earlier discussed in last lecture. What are the patient value and beliefs? What is their major life goal? Whether it is prognostic benefit, whether it is symptom relief, and the step of actual rationalization. That includes the therapies for the concurrent comorbidities, the potential interaction of different drugs, the potential side effect and adverse effect of the current management, and whether this treatment should be continued or not continued, and what are the other options available. So this all is actually a process of advanced care planning. So always document, always discuss about the resuscitant preference, and always ask about the preferred place of care, and always involve surrogate in the decision making. So to start with, because we are going to take the help of this chart in our upcoming slides. So there are different stages and functional class of cardiologies. today our topic of discussion will be advanced and end stage. So the stage C of ACC 2013 classification comes under the advanced stage heart failure, and the stage D comes under end of life and end stage heart disease. So C is described as a moderate to severe symptoms with frequent hospitalization. D is stage D. ACC classifies the heart failure or end stage cardiac disease as persistent refractory symptoms despite of the guided medical treatment, and it requires continuous hospitalizations. C may be class 3 and functional class 4, but the stage D end of life is always and always NYHA class 4. And you can see on the screen how much the annualized mortality rates are concerned with each of the stage. So the goals of therapy is bit different as compared to advanced heart failure in end stage heart failure. So as we discussed, advanced heart failure means stage C of the ACC 2013 classification, and stage D. The goals of therapy in advanced heart failure will be the lower the probability of heart failure related morbidity and mortality and hospitalization, more of symptom control, and improve health related quality of life. While the end stage heart failure, the goal of treatment will be palliation of the symptoms, reducing rate of the hospitalization, and in such eligible candidate to provide a bridging therapy to cardiac transplantation, or if not feasible, to establish an end of life care goal. And unlike in cancer, even if the patient is end stage heart failure, every attempt should be made to identify the reversible cause, like recanalization of the vessels in the cardiac of heart, percutaneous catheter intervention, any resynchronization therapy. So even in the end stage, we do intervention for the reversible cause. Although such group of patients are very less, but it should be entertained time to time, because the underlying pathophysiology may be very much different from patient to patient. Some may have the myocardial abnormality, some may have valvular abnormality, some may have arrhythmic abnormality, some may have thromboembolism abnormality. And the goals of end stage heart failure and the goals of advanced heart failure, taking this in consideration, we will discuss the pharmacological treatment ahead. So according to American College of Cardiology Federation 2013, the different drug have different role and fulfills different goal. Like if the improvement of morbidity and mortality are concerns, the drug of choice will be ACE inhibitor, followed by aldosterone receptor blocker, selected beta blocker, and aldosterone antagonist. If the control of symptoms are our priority, then diuretic, digitalis in some patients, and continuous inotrope support or the home-based inotrope support or some selected antiarrhythmic drug should be used. And obviously in palliation, use of opioids, antidepressant, especially is very precautious use of antidepressants, use of anxiolytics, oxygen, and continuous inotropes and home-based diuretic therapy we will discuss in very short in upcoming slides. So to start with, what are the overview of management of any end stage cardiac condition which ultimately leads to end stage heart failure? If there is any correctable cause, we actually go for the correcting those cause, might be revascularization, antiarrhythmic therapy, or antibiotic therapy. If in most of the patient the cause is not correctable, then we search for any optimal pharmacotherapy, which is known as guide-directed medical therapy. It has been defined by the American Association of Cardiology and known as GDMT, guided directed medical therapy. So if there is persistent symptoms, we consider the patient for intracardiac device. If there is some desynchronization in the cardiac chamber, we evaluate the patient for cardiac resynchronization therapy. But despite of cardiac resynchronization therapy or intracardiac devices, if the patient is showing persistent symptoms, the patient should be evaluated for the heart transplantation. seeing the logistic and the financial aspects and many other confounding factors associated with heart transplantation. If the patient is eligible for heart transplantation, we go for heart transplantation, but if it's not eligible, we provide some left ventricular assisted device, which is known as bridging therapy, to bridge the gap between the transplant and the current condition of the patient. But if transplantation is not feasible, this bridging therapy can be continuous, and which is known as destination therapy. So now we will discuss about the different cardiovascular medication, how we can rationalize those medication, especially in end of life, not in the stage 1 or stage A, B, but especially we will discussing here about the use of those medication in stage D, especially, that is end stage cardiac conditions. So suppose you want to rationalize a drug X, what exactly you will see? You will see the usual indication to modify the disease and to how it can actually improve the outcomes, which is known as goals, which is known as long-term benefit from that drug. Now you will search for any possible short-term benefit from the drug, which you will continue in end of life. So the important thing here is we are discussing about the drug use in end of life, okay, not in all the phases of heart failure, okay. So and the third thing you will see by the potential hemodynamic impact of that drug near end of life. What will the possible harm of continuing that drug, and what will happen if you discontinue that drug? What will be the adverse effect, and what will the beneficial effect if you discontinuation of drug might be beneficial, or might be it can go other way also. Okay, so now you have rationalized your discussion depending upon those factors. It is more of clinical rationalization, although the involvement of patient, surrogate, and delivering this information to the patient and considering some other option is always also a part of rationalization. So start with the most used drug in end stage cardiac disease, that is ACE inhibitor and aldosterone receptor blocker. So the goals of ACE inhibitor and aldosterone receptor blocker is to prolong the survival. So whatever I will elaborate here are the depending upon the studies which has been conducted. There might be multiple goals, there might be multiple benefits, but for which the study has shown the efficacy, I will discuss only over here. So the indications or the long-term goals are to prolong the survival, to prevent the reinfarction, to improve the ventricular function, to decrease the heart failure associated hospitalization, and to treat hypertension. This is the long-term goal of ACE inhibitor and aldosterone receptor blocker. What could be the possible short-term benefit of continuing at end of life? The study has shown not any known benefit for this short-term symptom benefit. What is the potential hemodynamic impact of continuing ARB? It lowers the blood pressure. That is the most concerned hemodynamic changes in end of life. And what is the deleterious effect of continuing this drug, ARB and ACE? Symptom of hypotension may occur, and there might be declining diuretic response. So if you want to optimize your diuretic response, you have to use this drug very cautiously. And what if I discontinue this drug at end of life? What will happen? The renal function is having a more likelihood of improving. There might be more symptoms of hypotension. Might be more improvement in the symptoms of hypotension. So if our goal is to optimize the renal function, if our goal is to improve the symptom of hypotension, we may consider discontinuing ACE and aldosterone receptor blocker near end of life. Now we will discuss upon the beta blocker. Like ACE inhibitor and ARBs, beta blocker also improves, has also been shown in a study to improve the survival, has also prevents from occurrence of reinfarction, has also improved the ventricular function. Alongside this, the additive benefit of beta blocker is it decreases the recurrence of ventricular tachycardia. and it also decreases the ventricular rate in atrial fibrillation. So if your concern is more of control of the atrial fibrillation or the tachycardia, the beta blocker may be added as second line from sub to ACE inhibitor and aldosterone receptor blocker. Although in earlier days, beta blocker was thought to be contraindicated in heart failure, especially with reduced ejection fraction because of its anti-adrenergic effect. And that's why, but in studies, it has been shown that it decreases the recurrence of ventricular tachycardia, and it decreases the occurrence of atrial fibrillation, ventricular rate in atrial fibrillation. That's why it has been introduced in the management of end-stage heart failure. So the short-term benefit of using near end of life are it decreases the anginal pain, it decreases the tachyarrhythmia, which is very much discomforting in some group of patients. The hemodynamic impact during end of life of beta blocker is high. It increases the filling pressure, it decreases the cardiac output, and it decreases the blood pressure because of the vasodilation of the peripheral vessels. So what could be the possible adverse effect of continuation of beta blocker end of life? As we all know, beta blocker is very much associated with fatigue, and most of the patient with end stage condition, be it cancer, be it any other disease, be it renal disease, be it cardiac disease, the fatigue is a very much prevalent symptom in the ranges from 30 to 50% prevalence in advanced stage of any etiology. So most of these beta blockers are actually lipophilic drug and can cause blood-brain barriers and very much affect this epinephrine, adrenaline and noradrenaline symptoms. That why it worsens the fatigue, it worsens the dyspnea because it can cause congestion in the pulmonary vasculature, and this obviously symptoms of hypotension because of the vasodilation of the peripheral structure. So if so if you are considering stopping of the beta blocker and end stage heart failure, yes, the symptoms of fatigue and the hypotension may improve, your renal function might improve, but always rationalize your discussion, because it may exacerbate the pain of angina, and it also may exacerbate the symptoms of arrhythmias. For that, European Society of Cardiology has some recommendation, which is grade 2 recommendation. If there is increase in congestion, increase the diuretic and half the dose of the beta blocker. And if there is marked fatigue or bradycardia, and if you want to continue the beta blocker, half the dose of the beta blocker in end of life. So that is how we rationalize the beta blocker in end stage heart failure. Third drug I want to discuss here are the angiotensin receptor antagonist. So all these drugs are actually impact the neurohumoral system. Some of the drug will actually affect the sympathetic compensatory mechanism. Some of the drug will affect the RAS compensatory mechanism, and ultimately the outcome is the change is the neurohumoral pathophysiology of the heart, and some of the drug will affect the remodeling of the heart. So this is much of a newer drug, angiotensin receptor 1 antagonist. The goals of this drug is prolong the survival and decrease the hospitalization. The short-term benefit is decrease the dyspnea and edema, and like beta blocker, it also lowers the blood pressure. So the main adverse effect of continuing this drug can be symptom of hypotension. There is much of not symptomatic benefit has been associated after discontinuation. Some symptom of hypotension may improve, and diuretic requirement may increase if you discontinue. So sort of a newer drug. So discussing very important drug, spironolactone, which is a potassium sparing diuretic, a mineralocorticoid antagonist. So the main indication of using in advanced stage, especially in advanced stage cardiac condition, is it decreases the fibrosis and improve the survival of the patient. It decreases the heart failure associated hospitalization also. These are the long-term effect of this drug. Suppose you want to continue for the symptom benefit, yes, it weakens the synergy with other diuretic, and it decreases the need of some need to take oral potassium. Suppose the patient is having the refractory hyperkalemia, so this drug can be used, and this drug can be also used with in association with other diuretics to add the effect. Although this synergy is weak and not very strong, which has been shown in study. So if you want to continue this drug, you should also aware of the hemodynamic effect, which is it's slightly lower the filling pressure, not very much like beta blocker and ACE inhibitor. And yes, if you want to continue, you should always be very precautious about the potassium level, and you need potassium binder to concur and go with this medication. So if you discontinue this drug at end of life, your renal function, the patient's renal function may improve, and less likely risk of hyperkalemia will be there. Although with the continuation, hypokalemia may cause cramp and muscle fatigue. Loop diuretics, which we can say it is the drug of choice, especially in the patient with fluid overload in end stage. So the goals of loop diuretics, it's not a first line drug for the end stage disease, but it's a very important drug for the end stage disease, especially the patient who are showing the sign and symptoms of fluid overload. So treat congestion and maintain fluid balance is the important goal. And if you want to establish some more in neurohumoral antagonism, then and to titrate other drugs, the loop diuretics is very much additive to aldosterone receptor blocker and ACE inhibitor. More effective treatment of dyspnea edema through diuresis. It is the short-term benefit of this drug. There might be other beneficial outcomes also, but this has been shown in studies. So most potential hemodynamic impact is it lowers the filling pressure and more efficiently in compared to spironolactone in compared to angiotensin receptor 2 blocker, more in compared to beta blocker, and more in compared to ACE inhibitor. So its hemodynamic impact is more on heart respect to all other drugs which we have discussed earlier. So it is not a potassium sparing, so potassium supplement may be needed in advanced stage, not in the end stage, but in both the condition need of potassium may increase, and we need to monitor the sodium and potassium level when we use this loop diuretics. And what happens if you discontinue this drug? There might be marked exacerbation of dyspnea and congestive symptoms, and a sign of fluid retention in form of shortness of breathing or a shortness of pedal edema. Hydralazine, it's a more of a additive drug rather than a single a monotherapy, because it enhance its effect on symptom benefit, and it also decrease the rate of hospitalization. It also has been used in treating the hypertension in some group of the patient, especially with the using the nitrate. Their study has shown there is no short-term benefit of using it end of life. The common hemodynamic impact during end of life are it modestly lower filling pressure, unlike the other diuretics. And if there is baseline vasoconstriction, this is very useful drug to lower the filling pressure. And if your patient is having mitral regurgitation, this drug should also be bring in the consideration. So what is the possible adverse effect? That this drug is very much nauseating, can cause nausea. If the patient is complaining of nausea vomiting, the addition of the hydralazine may increase the nausea. So if you discontinue, nausea may improve, and but the dyspnea might worsen if mitral regurgitations are severe. So if mitral regurgitation there's, this drug can be continued. Nitrate, as we all know, has been used for the relief of angina or in conjunction with the hydralazine, what we discussed earlier, and to treat hypertension. It has been used as antihypertensive in end of life also. So the end stage heart failure, sorry. So it decreases the dyspnea, it decreases the chest pain, it decreases the it decreases the blood pressure, and it also lowers the filling pressure. It also improves the valvular regurgitation. So if the patient underlying structural abnormality is valvular and the valvular regurgitation, this drug can be used even in the end of life. The most importantly, adverse effect all we know is it can cause headache, so may actually impact the quality of life of patients. So if the patient is repeatedly complaining of headache, you can discontinue the drug, but the discontinuation of this drug might actually worsen the dyspnea and might and may also improve the sign and symptom of hypotension, because it is a very much potent antihypertensive also. Statins, very much it is a very hard drug to discuss, because in our day-to-day practice, what we have seen, even in the end of life phase, physician have continued statins. So the long-term outcome, we all know, is to improve the outcomes of atherosclerotic disease, but there are no any short-term benefit or any of continuing this drug. Although the possible adverse effect that may happen at the end of life is it can actually aggravate the myalgias, which what most of the patient complain of. And there is no known benefit of this drug to continue at end of life. So other drug is Digitalis. In some such group of patient, if you want some arrhythmia treatment, then this drug should be considered. So in patient who have shown dysarrhythmia, this decrease the hospitalization in symptomatic heart failure, and it also decrease the rate in atrial fibrillation like beta blockers. So if the beta blocker is not effective, Digitalis glycoside with special consideration can be added. So it decreases the hemodynamic impact is decrease the rate in atrial fibrillation, and most of the patient actually gets atrial fibrillation associated and especially with the conduction abnormality. So this patient, if you are considering a short-term benefit from the Digitalis, you can add to decrease the rate in atrial fibrillation. And as we all know, this atrial fibrillation is associated with sudden cardiac death, even in the end stage heart failure. So that's why it decreases the mortality. So it modestly affects the cardiac output. Thus, adverse effect of this of Digitalis glycosides or nausea, visual disturbance, and associated renal toxicity and declining renal functions. Fourth is the another class of drug. NSAIDs are not actually routinely used, but I want to discuss it over because it is a very much contraindicated drug in heart failure, and very few actually group of patients will be considered, especially in form of aspirin. So if you ask, it is totally contraindicated, and but in some group of patients who are having the pain related to musculoskeletal pain, adjusted dose, especially in gout, can be considered. What could be the adverse effect? That it may increase the fluid overload, so may increase the dyspnea and edema. It may also can cause acute kidney injury because of the tubular damage. And if the patient is end stage or advanced stage heart failure, we may need to discontinue this drug, which may improve the sign and symptom of fluid overload and may improve the renal functions also. Sodium and fluid restriction is also a part of pharmacological treatment, and the judicious use of the judicious use of fluid and sodium use has been associated with the decrease in the fluid retention and treating the hypertension. The possible short-term benefit of continuing sodium and fluid, especially in form of salt, is with a decrease the dyspnea and it decrease the dyspnea and edema. And potential hemodynamic impact is retention is it lowers the filling pressure, and it also improves the valvular regurgitation. What could be the possible adverse effect if you continue this at end of life? So one is with the diminished enjoyment of food and social contacts. There's very much of ethical concern, more of emotional concern also among the family. It diminishes the quality of life of the patient. It may accelerate the cachexia also, because the complex cachexia is a multiple having the multiple pathophysiology, and one might be the dyselectrolytemia. So cachexia may be accelerated. Family conflicts around adherence, which is not common in our day-to-day practice. So what if what can happen if I discontinue this sodium and water restriction? There might be relaxation, and which may improve the quality of life of the patient, and it may improve the social contacts of the patient. And in some anticipated if the death is anticipated within a few days, you can give some form of relaxation, taking the emotional aspects of patients and their family, and it may reduce the patient and family conflicts related to strict adherence to the sodium and water restriction. So two important message I would like to take from this previous slides are: the NC inhibitor should be used in every stage, even with the ejection fraction, even in the ejection fraction less than 35 to 40%, independent of symptoms, whether the patient is much symptomatic, refractory symptomatic, or mild to moderate symptomatic. AC inhibitor should be part of your prescription unless contraindicated. So, and in several large studies, it has been seen that AC inhibitor has been shown to improve the mortality, decrease the hospitalization, improve the morbidity, and decrease the rate of mortality. So AC inhibitor and then aldosterone receptor blocker. In some group of the patient, we made beta blockers. In some of the patient with conduction motility digitalis. In some of the patient with very much symptomatic use of diuretics. So that is how you rationalize your pharmacological management depending upon the goals of therapy. So I would also like to discuss here the special consideration like inotrope infusion, diuretic therapy, and opioids. I'm not going to discuss the symptom management heart failure, but these are very much related with the symptom management. So the inotrope infusion has been selectively used for the treatment of refractory heart failure. And there should be a very much careful consideration of starting inotrope infusion, because most of the inotrope infusions start at hospitalization. The patient become end of life, and the patient now prefers to shift to home base, but there might be some clinical and ethical concern of discontinuing this inotrope infusion. For the patient discharged on home inotropes, it has improved the survival, but that should not be the only consideration. It also decreases the mortality, but it lower but it is may not be directly related to decreasing the mortality, because most of the patient have some implantable cardiac defibrillator in situ, or some other cofactors like use of other pharmacological management also. So there might be other confounding factors. So what recommendations has said that patient should not be discharged on intravenous inotrope infusion with the anticipation that that will occur peacefully at home, like diuretic therapy. Unlike diuretic, patient should not be discharged on intravenous inotrope infusions, because if you discharge this patient readmitted with the recurrent symptom of infections or break in the indwelling catheters. The potential complication and the inconvenience of patient and family warrants repeated attempts to win inotrope before discharge. So it's a discussion should always conducted with the family and the patient according, and depending upon their preference, such treatment should be continue. One additional concern is that many home nursing agencies, especially in our country, are not offering the benefit of hospice care. So continuing this drug can be very much costly and burdensome for the patient and their family. Coming to diuretics, unlike the inotropes, diuretic has been used in community setting, and as we have already discussed, it decreases the fluid overload. But what happens, we can't in most of the setting we can't continue it orally because of the gut edema. there is fluid over, that might be gut edema, so there is decreased absorption of any oral drug. So the whenever patients show some sign of decomposition, period of decomposition always and always require hospitalization. But when you are planning for the discharge, use of community-based diuretic therapy can be taken, and it has been shown in studies also by Bennett Jam in which was published in BMJ 2012. A nurse-led administration of diuretic in community setting has been shown very much effective and safe at reducing the hospital admission and some signs and symptoms of the fluid overload. So, but one problem with the community setting is that venous access might be difficult. In that scene, although no any potential study has been conducted, but we know that there's off-label use and off-license use of subcutaneous diuretics has been seen, especially in Kerala model. Also, they are using subcutaneous diuresis in end-stage heart failure in community setting also. Opioids, we all know, with different mechanism, there are 6 potential different mechanism why opioid actually decrease the perception of the breathlessness in refractory dyskinesia, and like in cancer and end-stage cancer disease, in end-stage cardiac condition, or opioid is also very much safe and in lower and small doses. And when you study a study which was an RCT, Oxenberg SG in 2011 has also has shown its impact on improving the symptoms of breathlessness in end-stage cardiac conditions. So our overview of various cardiac devices, we are going to discuss about the various cardiac devices, and especially withholding and withdrawing decision. So we need to know a bit about some of those cardiac devices. The CRT and ICDs, that is cardiac resynchronization therapy and implantable cardiac defibrillator. These both drugs are known as CIED, cardiac implanted electronic devices. So this CRT may be used independently or may be used in conjunction with ICD, which is known as CRT-D. So cardiac resynchronization therapy and cardiac resynchronization therapy with defibrillator property known as CRT-D. So in which group of patients we use this? Especially in NYHA class 2 to 4 with ejection fraction less than 35% and the QRS more than 150. What this QRS more than 150 is suggestive of? It is suggestive of desynchronization between the 2 heart chamber, that is right and left sided heart. So the CRT therapy, that with no only it suggests cardiac resynchronization therapy, it decreases the desynchronization between the two ventricles. So it improves the cardiac output and it optimizes the heart function. What is the function of the implantable cardiac devices? It reduces the sudden cardiac death associated with atrial fibrillation or dysarrhythmia. So CRT actually improves the synchronization and ICD actually improves the occurrence of, it decreases the occurrence of dysarrhythmia. In ICD has been used in class 2 to 3 heart failure, but very uncommon in class 4 functional classification. It has been used with ejection fraction less than 30 to 35% who are on G and GDMT. GDMT, as I earlier discussed, goal-directed medical treatment. So along with the pharmacological treatment to improve the arrhythmia, ICD has been used. So the goals of cardiac resynchronization therapy is reduce the symptom of moderate to severe heart failure, and the goal of ICD is to reduce the sudden cardiac death. In some special consideration who are stage D and now planning for the cardiac transplantation, left ventricular assisted device, that is LVAD, has been used as bridge therapy, means we are planning for the cardiac transplant. But in subgroup of patient in which the cardiac transplant is not feasible, the LVAD is associated with a permanent therapy which is known as destination therapy. And the patient with left ventricular assisted device are high risk of stroke, high risk of bleeding, high risk of infection, and an average survival after implantation is less than 5 years. So in 2013, the United States Joint Commission has mandated that whenever you are implanting LVAD, the discussion should be or occur very much earlier compared to CRT and ICDs. So this is the picture. The difference between this CRT and ICD is that CRT is having the multiple ports and cables. The ICD is having only 2 ports. So now you have actually put, suppose the cardiac synchronization therapy, that is actually popularly known as a specialized kind of pacemaker. So we will denote it as a pacemaker. Now the patient might be a super responder, might be a only responder. Patient might not respond, does not progress, so known as non-progressors. So these three things are known as positive clinical benefit. Some patient won't be responding, known as non-responder, and some patient will be negatively response. So these are the possible clinical course after cardiac resynchronization therapy, popularly known as pacemaker. So there is no any vigorous studies has been conducted, but there are several guidelines and recommendation. The 2 popular recommendation come with the first come with the Heart Rhythm Society expert consensus. A position paper was brought in 2010, and another paper was from the Resuscitation Society of British Cardiovascular Society in 2016. So these 2 papers actually gives idea about the withholding and withdrawing of the various implantable cardiac devices. Okay. So to start with, what could be the general consideration of withholding or withdrawing of this treatment? What could be the possible appropriateness? So the prerequisites are should be always inform patient wishes and view. There should be appropriate clinical circumstances. Depending upon which type of device you are considering for withholding and withdrawing, because the property of CRT is very much different with the property of implantable cardiac devices. And what is the purpose of each device? Like if the purpose is to control the atrial fibrillation, the ICD will come in the scenario. If the purpose is to decrease the morbidity and mortality and the hospitalization, the CRT will come into the consideration. What could be the beneficial and harmful effect of discontinuation of such devices? And this should all be discussed with the patient and their family. Who all the professionals involved in this withholding and withdrawing of the treatment? Obviously, the cardiologist who are treating the patient. There are some special known as nurses known as heart failure specialist nurses, arrhythmia specialist nurses, cardiophysiologist. The importance of cardiophysiologist become very much strong when with the patient we are considering for the withholding and withdrawing of these cardiac devices. A general practitioner who will see the patient, and a non-cardiologist, physician or surgeons, and whenever available, a specialist or generalist palliative care physician. So whenever we discuss withholding and withdrawing of the treatment, what the first thing comes in our mind is the ethical and legal concerns. Withdrawing is known as more of on background of any end stage condition or terminal age, a decision to make to cease or remove a life-sustaining intervention. Whether patient's chance of survival with continuing life-sustaining treatment is poor, with the burden outweighs the possible benefit, then we will call it as a withdrawing of the treatment. What is withholding of the treatment? Say on a background of terminal illness, a decision made not to initiate or escalate a life-sustaining treatment, where the patient's chance of survival after initiation or escalation of the life-sustaining treatment is poor, which is known as withholding. So, and I got this paper on Google's in 2012. Failure to deactivate an implantable cardiac defibrillator in a man caused an out-of-court settlement for the National Health Services. This was published in Telegraph. So this shows how important it is ethically and importantly legally also, to withdraw or withhold or deactivate such kind of implantable cardiac devices, especially is end of life, because this might be very much distressful for the patient and their families. A patient with decision-making capacity has the legal right to refuse or request for the withdrawal of any medical treatment, like including these devices. So that is a general principle. And the patient who lacks the capacity, you should also search for any appropriate surrogate. So Human Organ and Transplantation Act, you can decide the hierarchy of the surrogate. So that actually guide us for the deciding surrogates. Yeah, so we, as in our India law also, the law consumes every adult patients are competent, and only a court can declare a patient incompetent. But what we take in consideration are decision making capacity of the patient. So being incompetent and being having the decision making capacity are two different things. So our assessment is based on decision making capacity without involvement, which actually involves without involvement of courts. But in some legal matters, a court should be involved to decide the competency of the patients. So ethically and legally, there are no difference between refusing or asking for refusing or requesting for the withdrawal of cardiac implantable electronic device. So, and yes, in Western world, they have been used advanced directive. So it's not very much challenging for them as far as our Indian context is concerned, where advanced directives is still lacking in our community setting. So the right to refuse or request of withdrawal of a treatment is a personal right of a patient, and does not depend upon the characteristic of a particular involved. So, and unlike other treatments, this implantable cardiac device therapy has no unique ethical or legal status. So like, while like you are using for other devices, like you are using for ventilator, the same principle applies to cardiac implantable devices. So the clinician cannot be compelled to carry out ethically or legally permissible procedure like deactivation of the cardiac devices if his personal view is in conflict. So what will happen in this scenario? He can actually take help of the other clinician. So these are very much practical problem. That's why I brought it into the slides. So how we can consider deactivation, how we can start the discussion. The discussion start as soon as we implant this cardiac device. It doesn't occur when the patient has deteriorated already. It occurs when the patient has considered for the implantation of those cardiac devices, or the patient having all the patient prognosis looks like last few weeks and months of their life. Although due to undulating and various variation in the progression as far as this heart failure is concerned, the prognosis is very much difficult. Different kind of prognostic model we have discussed in earlier lecture also. So one important reason for discontinuation of this intracardiac device is they give shock even if the end of life, and this multiple shock where we can be very much troublesome and discomforting for the patient and their family, especially in last few hours and days. So a care should always be taken to ensure that patient heart failure have received appropriate specialist assessment. So before considering for the deactivation, always and always go back, see the medical record of the patient, and see a standard treatment or optimal treatment has been received by this patient. Some patient may require temporary deactivation, not comes under withholding or withdrawing, but some special patient may require temporary deactivation. Suppose the patient's device is not functioning, or the patient you want to take for some having the background of cancer and need some palliative radiation. So in those contexts also, a temporary deactivation can be considered for implantable cardiac devices. So how you, knowing this all basic knowledge, how will you effectively put it into the practice? The concept is communication, communication, and communication. So like in what we follow in cancer, the protocol of breaking bad news, step which has been given by the American American College of Cardiology and Resuscitation Society of United Kingdom. The step is similar. The first step is to determine what families and patient and their family knows about the illness. Second is what they know about the device. Third is what additional information they may need. Four is what misconception and misunderstanding regarding the current illness and possible outcome is there in the family and patient's mind, and what are the overall goals of care for the patient and their family and their desired outcome. Some might suggest, some might think of prognostic benefit, and most of the patient actually thinks of symptomatic benefit in such state of heart failure. So in using the stated goals in above mentioned step, we actually design how we will manage these cardiac devices. So what will the prerequisite and logistic for deactivation? Any physician or center that implant cardiac devices should have facility for withdrawal of the therapies as per the protocol. But the deactivation of a cardiac therapies require a special form of physician and nurses, and a special form of informed consents. There is no standard informed consents, but one informed consent has been published in the Resuscitation Society of United Kingdom in 2016. Although help of the extra, the form can be extrapolated from the cancer settings also, and institutional adaptation can be done. So, but this all happens when the patient is having advanced care planning and advanced directed. But in emergency situation, a verbal order from the treating cardiologist with documentation within 24 hours, a patient can be considered for the deactivation of the implantable cardiac devices. And there is a concept of industry employed allied professional. What is industry employed allied professional? These are the person specially designated for this from the company who make this implantable cardiac device, which helps the physician regarding the management of those cardiac devices, especially for the replacement, but can also be considered when you are thinking of withdrawing or withholding such cardiac devices. The deactivation process should also include the symptoms, and such symptoms should also be explained to the patient and their families, like the discontinuation of the ICD device can actually cause very much arrhythmia and can cause sudden death. Deactivation of any anti-tachycardia therapy may actually cause tachycardia and discomfort to the patient, and these ICDs are actually deactivated by application of the ring magnet. So this is not a special kind of magnet we actually apply over the cardiac devices, and this deactivates this cardiac devices. So, and some of the deactivation are not done by the magnet. There are some facilities available on the machine, so you can actually reprogram or to the specific mode and it become deactivated. So this is how we apply the magnet if the patient we are considering for the deactivation of the intracardiac devices. So the withholding and withdrawing of such treatment, especially discontinuation of the implantable cardiac devices, it should always followed by a proper documentation. What documentation you will check for? A consent from the patient. It should be informed written consent, appropriate legal surrogate, capacity of the patient, confirmation that alternative therapies has already been discussed, confirmation that consecration of the deactivation has been discussed, what are the specific device therapy which has been deactivated, and notification of the family which in written form. So there is no standard form, but these 6 things should always be come in your form. So how to deactivate the device? So most of the centers especially in emergency situation, the expertise are not available. Suppose a patient suppose a center is specialized in heart transplantation or cardiac devices. So most of the time in those center expertise are available. So and they have a designated electrophysiologist which is specialist in that. Suppose a center doesn't have, suppose when a patient comes to you, so any medical person or a hospice physician or nurse can actually deactivate, provided that they should contact with the industry employed allied professional. These are the same person which we discussed earlier, designated by the company who makes that cardiac implantable devices. And in such a emergency situation, or in such a scenario where the expertise are not available, the help of this IEAP can be considered. So now you have withdrawn, you have withhold your this cardiac devices. Now the decisions comes, right? How we should manage. So this is more of an ethical concern also, a legal concern also, and a medical concern also. So most of the pacemaker are having the memory function. You can check for the what just before death, what abnormality and rhythm abnormality.
Avinash, can I interrupt you? Avinash, can you just summarize? It is 7:30 and people have to go for their work. So can you? It is going on excellent, Avinash. I understand with all the excellent presentation you prepared, but please summarize it, huh? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So device management is to take the appropriate information from the various cardiac devices before disposing them. So, ma'am, this is the last slide only. I have taken the reference from this, all these references. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avinash. I hope I would have not disturbed you in between, but it's okay. So thank you. I think it was such an important and excellent lecture. Everybody must have learned what exactly we should do in a patient who is in heart is a basically end stage heart failure. So with my, I think first we can have a question which Dr. Stanley has put. One question he is asking that what are the, first everybody is appreciating your lecture, Avinash. It was, I think you must have worked really hard to prepare this lecture. So what medication can be given subcutaneous in end of life care setting at home in end stage heart failure? So I think you have given enough answer in your lecture, but if you can just enumerate medications.
There has not been a vigorous study has been conducted, but in community setting, even in India also, especially in Kerala model, they have been using subcutaneous furosemide, starting with the 40 to 60 milligram of bolus dose and continuing with the 5 to 10 milligram per hour of continuous dose. So as per my knowledge, they have been using diuretic therapy for the management of heart failure per se. For symptom management, they have been using other drugs also.
Thank you, Avinash. And I think there are no other questions, but a lot of appreciation. And I think we have to appreciate, and we have to really say that you have really worked hard for this lecture, because we don't see these patients in day-to-day practice. This must have, whatever you have prepared from the exhaustive literature which you have brought from various available literature. And with my own experience, I just want to say one thing, that in these days we see heart failure patients, and in heart failure patients, it is not the communication with the patients which is important, it is the communication with the cardiologist which is important, because cardiologists, they will never be able to, you have to make them understand that there is ultimately, we have to withdraw many medications which are not, or we have to decrease the many medications which are unnecessary, causing harm to the patient. And Avinash has given such a beautiful example of various medication and what to continue, what to not continue. Like statin, there is no need to continue. But if you will say to the cardiologist, they will not be able to understand. So it will come again. I'm not disappointing, but it will come again. It will take 5 more years. If all over those who are sitting over here and they are listening, that your efforts will make a huge difference, because as the oncology people have integrated palliative medicine very beautifully all over India, I think other people will also integrate, but it will take some time. So, and it will take your consistent effort and patience. So it will come definitely. Whatever knowledge which Avinash has given, please don't forget it, and try to apply. Even if you will apply on a single patient in your hospital wherever you are working, it will make a huge difference. We are almost finishing Academy lectures 3, third series. We have 3 more lectures, so we will not stop it, and we will not stop in between. So we will continue with 3 more lectures, and then we will have a break for 2 weeks, and then we will start with new and absolutely other, and again an innovative way of IAPC Academy 4. So thank you very much. And